Hello there friends, and welcome to the first ever video on the Gensokyo Reviewer channel. Today I have a very entry-level video for your viewing pleasure. A review, or retrospective if you prefer, of Touhou 6. My personal gift to the community for the game's 20th anniversary. If you find yourself enjoying the video, please consider throwing the monkey dancing in the cage a like and subscribe. You don't even have to pay the usual quarter that you do at other feeding machines. You could call it a mutually beneficial arrangement. Touhou, for those who don't know, is a franchise of vertically scrolling danmaku shooters developed by a functioning alcoholic named Junya Ota, but you can call him Zun. Many Touhou fans have never touched the games, and lots of people new to Touhou don't even know that there are games. The truth is that Touhou's global popularity comes not from the source, the games, but from all the derivative works from those games, chief among them being, obviously, the music, but other works like art, fan games, bootleg merchandise, doujin mangas, the official mangas, the other mangas, etc. are all popular both inside and outside of the Touhou community. While this is great and all, and it's nice to see that Zun's lax copyright policy has allowed his world and the characters in it to flourish on the internet like really no other franchise, the original source of all these amazing works, the games, kind of take a backseat to it all. Well, not today specifically since it's Touhou 6's 20th birthday, but you get what I mean. Of course, this isn't inherently bad, but one undesirable effect of it is that passionate, well-made YouTube videos that dive deep into the games is very hard to come by, at least on English-speaking YouTube. So, I come to this hellhole of a website seeking to remedy that. Welcome to Touhou Review, the series where I take an in-depth look at the gameplay, music, lore, characters, development, and reception of all the mainline Touhou games, yes, the PC-98 ones too, and review and analyze them for your viewing pleasure. In this episode, the Embodiment of Scarlet Devil. Let's get started. The Embodiment of Scarlet Devil, which I will alternatingly call EoSD and Touhou 6 from now on because Zun loves long convoluted names, I hate to think what his children have to go through, is the sixth game in the series. It was the first game to be released for Windows and not PC-98, and its importance to not just the games but to the Touhou franchise as a whole cannot be understated. Many tracks from EoSD remain among the most popular music from the franchise even 2 decades after its release. Characters from EoSD are also among the most popular in their regard, and it's also just the best-selling Touhou game ever, according to Zun himself. At the time of recording, it's sitting at over 300,000 downloads on Mariah Shrine, the most downloaded thing on the website. In fact, EoSD is, or at least was, one of the most popular games in Japan, period. For example, the Japanese Touhou Wiki has voted EoSD as the most popular game in the series every year since 2016, according to another wiki. I can't really verify it, I'm just gonna trust the wiki. It would be hard for EoSD to be a bestseller anywhere else because most of the international Touhou community is united under the Jolly Roger. But I'm sure if Zun didn't slip in the bath and forget EoSD's source code in the ensuing concussion, and there was an official release on Steam or elsewhere, EoSD still probably wouldn't be a bestseller outside of Japan, but I wouldn't have a guilty conscience. So you can imagine that when talking about Touhou games, EoSD is often the first one that comes to mind for many people, and for good reason. Although there are certainly better games later on in the series, it still manages to be impressive gameplay and presentation-wise, and especially music-wise, and I find myself coming back to it often for its sweet, unique flavor of RNG bullshit. Just don't judge it based off the character models. Zun does not draw characters the way you'd think a pale, skinny Japanese man would draw characters. For better or for worse, he's a little quirky like that. I even have my own shrine dedicated to him, like all good Touhou fans should. In fact, the bigger the shrine you have, the more respected you are among the community. It's like how the deer with the biggest antlers is the leader, or the guy with the biggest cock. Touhou 6, The Embodiment of Scarlet Devil, was released on August 11, 2002. Hey, that's exactly 20 years ago from the time this video goes up, what a coincidence. It was first sold at the 60-second Comic-Con, which is a big Japanese nerd convention, think America's Comic-Con. The game was later sold via online mail order. 2002 was a different time. The circumstances around EoSD's release are definitely the most unique in the series. In fact, EoSD was never even supposed to be released in the first place. Neither was Mystic Square, the 5th game for that matter. That's right, Touhou Project was originally intended to end with the 4th game, Lotus Land Story. For context, that's the one with Bad Apple in it. Yup, Touhou was never meant to be moved onto Windows. It was to be forever relegated to a few Japanese shmup fanatics' memories as that one silly PC98 indie shmup with the little girls, while Zune got an actual job or something stupid like that.
Well, he did get a job, but he worked said job in conjunction with developing Touhou all the way up until Touhou 10. But this video isn't about that, so shut up!
It isn't known why Zune decided to go ahead and make another Touhou game. Just kidding, it is. It's because of money. It's because Lotus Land Story sold more copies at Comiket than Zune expected. Thank you to everybody who bought Lotus Land Story at Comiket, even though they're all probably dead by now. So Zune decided to keep making Touhou games, eventually releasing Mystic Square, the fifth and final entry in the PC98 series, and that was it. No more Touhou. No more $19 shrine donation. Zune would go on to work at Taito, a Japanese game development company, and leave behind his life as a doujin creator and start living the more average life of a Japanese salaryman. That's it. But wait, that's not it. Otherwise, you wouldn't be watching this video. Years passed after Zune created Mystic Square, and for a long time, though insignificant in the grand scheme of the universe, it seemed like he really did grow out of his nerdy doujin developer phase. Then, sometime in early 2002, Zune would post a blog update that would probably change the internet forever. Zune, in this blog post, announced the release of a brand new Touhou project entry, and this time it would be developed for Windows instead of PC98. It would be pretty weird if he kept developing games for the PC98 system after it had basically fallen off the face of the earth during his 4-year hiatus. And you, if you're a longtime Touhou fan, probably would have led a more happy and fulfilling life, but that's not the universe we live in. Sorry, bud. That new entry was, it's obviously Touhou 6, that's literally what this video is about. This video is literally a celebration for Touhou 6's 20th anniversary. What did you think it was? Though Zune didn't just decide to continue where he left off with the PC98 series, just with a fresh, Microsoft-approved coat of paint. No, he decided that the series would need a reboot of sorts for its ambitious jump to Windows. That means new canon, new characters, and lots, and lots, and lots of retconning. In Zune's own words, the PC98 games are canon until they contradict something from the Windows games. So basically, fuck the PC98 games. Just kidding, they're still very important to the franchise. It's not like everything was scrapped in favor of an entirely new series though. The location of the game remains the same, the wonderful anarchist paradise of Gensokyo, as do many of the artistic themes and story beats. Some magical girl causes trouble in colorful magical girl land, and a magical girl sets out to solve the problem. The main characters of the series, being Reimu and Marissa, are also here to stay. Alice too, for some reason, but she's in the next game, so bye-bye for now. Basically, Touhou 6 can be considered the de facto first game in the series, and the PC98 games is their own separate series with their own canon and characters. In fact though, many people start with Touhou 6 as their first Touhou game instead of Touhou 1. I regrettably did not. I regretted it. Now that you know the story of EoSD, as much of it as I could verify from wikis and decades-old Japanese websites at least, it's time for me to tell you about the story of EoSD. One peaceful summer day in Gensokyo, an isolated region in Japan where non-human creatures and just a few humans live, a mysterious scarlet mist falls over the land. You see where this is going. This mist is thick enough to block out the sun and make any affected area really cold. I like the cold, but apparently our protagonists do not. Reimu Hakure, the shrine maiden of the Hakure Shrine, knows that this mist could expand outside of Gensokyo and into the wider human world. Unrelated, but she would also get active camouflage from this mist, and she wears the same clothes all the time. If the outside world learns about Gensokyo, they'd surely be destroyed by the evil outsiders with all of their fancy schmancy technology. Yeah, I've heard that one before. Reimu decides that today she would actually have to do her job. Thus, she sets out to find the source of the Scarlet Mist. And then there's Marissa. Marissa is flying through the sky as one does, probably on her way to harass Reimu, when she observantly notices that she actually can't see Reimu because of the natural camouflage the fog gives her. That's not actually canon, but I'm already grasping at straws here. In order to have a second character in the game besides Reimu, Marissa also sets out to find the source of the Scarlet Mist. In reality, she's probably just looking for things to steal. I'm taking most of this from the game's manual. Well, what little of it is translated at least, because me no speaky Japanese. But I still suggest you take a look at it yourself. It has some pretty clever translated jokes, like calling Reimu a sharp-witted girl, and then a few paragraphs later calling Marissa a normal-witted girl. Now, DeepL Translate did translate this specific joke, so I think I can attribute this to Zune and not the translators. 1 point. And, of course, since I brought them up, I now need to talk about Reimu and Marissa. but for the sake of purity, I'll only be going off of what we know about them according to Touhou 6, again mostly in the manual. Reimu, quote, appears quite carefree on the outside, and indeed deep down, she really is carefree. She lives in her shrine and is rarely visited by anyone, which causes her to be out of touch with current social norms. So she's just a Touhou fan with extra stats. Oh my god, she just like me for real. Marissa also, quote, isolates herself from other people. Although she possesses sharp wisdom, she normally doesn't use it to her benefit. As a being that humanity is left behind, she doesn't get involved with them. She's just satisfied being able to do whatever she wants. Wait till you hear this next line. Among all, her favorite thing in the world is Reimu, so she frequently visits the Red Shrine made into play. If you've ever wondered if there's a reason why people ship Reimu and Marissa besides the fact that they're the two main characters, there's your answer. So, with all that out of the way, let's see what the game actually looks like. Oh, and there's a patch for this game that makes it look prettier called the retexture patch. Lots of people use it, but again, for the purity of this review, I won't be using it. It does look very pretty though. Overall, the main menu has a pretty catchy theme to it, but you can't really enjoy it in-game because Reimu is just sitting there, watching you. At least if you go idle in the menu for more than 5 seconds, the game will start playing a demo. You have plenty of options in the options menu. I know, it's crazy, but it's surprisingly more options than the rest of the games in the first generation afford you. You can configure the amount of lives and or bombs that you start the game with, switch between 16 and 32-bit graphics, etc. I'm literally showing them to you on screen. You can see them, unless you're tabbed into something else. But you wouldn't do that, would you? There's also the music room, which we will dive into later, the score menu, which lets you see your personal leaderboard, and the replay menu, where you can see replays that you saved. But you're here for the meat and potatoes, the big enticing start buttons. There's 3 options: start, extra start, and practice start. Start is self-explanatory, it starts the actual game. Extra start is for the extra stage, which again, we'll get into later. Practice start is for practicing specific stages, which is useful if you're trying to beat the game on a harder difficulty, or if you're doing a challenge run, but you have to beat the stage on that difficulty through normal gameplay before you can unlock it for practicing. Unless you downloaded a copy of the game that has everything unlocked for you, but you wouldn't do that, would you? Obviously, we have our 4 quintessential Touhou difficulties: easy, normal, hard, and lunatic. Most of the background gameplay you'll be seeing will be on lunatic difficulty, but I'll be generally talking about the game from the perspective of normal difficulty. Touhou 6 sits comfortably in the middle of the Touhou game difficulty spectrum. Copyright 2022 Gensokyo Reviewer. Unless you play it on Lunatic. Then it shoots up to being one of the hardest Touhous to 1-2C. That is because the game is already chock full of RNG bullshit, so the jump from hard to Lunatic, which I'm pretty sure adds twice as many bullets, is apparently the straw that broke this game's already precariously balanced difficulties back. I'm sure this is probably because Zune, wanting EoSD to be a fresh start for the series, made EoSD as back to basics and simple as possible, straying away from complex bullet patterns, or silly things like fair game design, opting instead to be an outlet for many a broken keyboard, monitor, desk, and drywall. In his own words, translated from Japanese into American,
the Embodiment of Scarlet Devil brings things back to the starting point by curbing the game's systems that change the difficulty in obscure ways while at the same time pursuing the natural fun of dodging bullets.
Of course, game systems that change the difficulty in obscure ways means weird or confusing gimmicks, which are indeed absent in EoSD. There's no confusing gameplay mechanics that are only explained in the manual and not in the actual game itself. We'll get to those in later videos. It's a vertically scrolling shmup stripped down to its most raw, basic form. In a good way. Despite all this, Touhou 6 does bring some very important new mechanics to the table. I was actually surprised when I learned this too, but technically EoSD's gimmick is actually the spell card system itself. If you don't know what the spell card system is, a very basic explanation is that spell cards are kind of like a character's unique special attacks. The system was set in place by Reimu in order to prevent the denizens of Gensokyo from murdering each other. It was thought of and developed by Zune while he was working on another game, Seiho Project, which is like the Luigi to Touhou's Mario, or the hypothetical Senai to a hypothetical Reimu, if you will. The spell card system's first appearance in Touhou, though, is in EoSD. It's an iconic, unique, honestly honestly ingenious part of the series that helps give every character their own personality and skill set, which is partly the reason why Touhou characters are more popular than Touhou itself. So the spell card system is a very important addition to the games. Of course, it's hard to call it a gimmick when it's in literally every single official Touhou release after EoSD, even the non-shmup titles, as well as pretty much every single Touhou fan game ever made, as well as being an integral part of the franchise's lore and appearing often in the mangas, both official and fan-made, but still, that doesn't change the fact that EoSD was mainly made as a medium to introduce the spell card system. And if you really want to get technical, EoSD's true gimmick is the rather annoying but relatively unknown mechanic where every time you death bomb, a technique where you bomb milliseconds after you die in order to prevent yourself from losing a life, the window for you to perform said technique is shortened. It's a system that's unique to EoSD, the PC98 games aren't included, making it fall under the category of a gimmick. Not like death bombing is very common in this game anyways, because the window is already quite short, 6 frames to be precise, and you can't even see your hitbox. Wait, I'm not supposed to talk about that yet. And while we're on the topic of annoying features, the rank system. The rank system is a mechanic present in competitive games such as Rainbow Six Siege or Valorant. It helps to sort players into groups based on skill to allow for fairer competitive play and more satisfying progression. The rank system in EoSD is nothing like that, and my last 2 sentences have nothing to do with this video. In EoSD, there is a hidden mechanic working in the background for the whole time you play. It's called the rank system. The way it works is the longer you play without dying or bombing, and the more score you can get, the higher an imaginary number that you can't see gets. The higher this invisible number is, the harder the game gets, meaning more bullets and faster bullets. If you die, bomb, death bomb, etc., this imaginary number goes down and the game gets easier. There are more factors that go into it, as well as specific numbers, but for the sake of not making this video a feature-length award-winning movie starring Jared Leto, I won't go that deep into it. Pause if you want to read this wiki article. Are you done yet? Christ, you're a slow reader. We were just about to start the game without you. Now, you may notice something strange about easy mode. Is it perhaps that the color for easy is green, and green is my favorite color? No, of course not. It's that easy mode has 5 stages overall, and every other difficulty has 6 stages overall. Green is my favorite color though. This is an old relic of PC98 games that stuck around for EoSD, but not any of the other Windows entries. Back in my day, just kidding, I wasn't even born yet, you had to play on normal difficulty or higher to play the 6th stage. Zune just straight up didn't make a 6th stage for easy mode back then. And this practice leaked into EoSD, which funnily enough actually does have a 6th stage for easy mode. It was just scrapped, before we realized that it's not the smartest idea to lock 14.3% of your game away from players who aren't very good at it. You could say that maybe Zune wanted players to get good at the game to truly experience it before they were worthy to beat it, but in that case, why wouldn't he just pull an Elden Dark Souls ring and remove difficulty options altogether? Also, it's a goddamn arcade game. Well, arcade-inspired game, but you get my meaning. Basically, I think it's good that Zune did away with this system. I don't even play on easy mode, but I think that it's fair that people who utterly suck at the game should be able to experience Touhou firsthand, like everyone else. I mean, I pretty much made this channel to make Touhou games more visible and accessible to the public, so duh. I think that giving the player a bad ending, if they use continues, is good enough to encourage growth. Plus, getting better at shmups and checking more boxes on your 1cc tracker is just plain fun if you're partial to the genre. And it's just not fun if, say, you're a casual Touhou enjoyer / lore maniac who wants to try out the games to get the full story behind the settings and characters from the source, but you can't because you're horrible at bullet hells and get too frustrated to get good at them. You'd probably just look them up on YouTube, but that's no fun. Not you specifically, of course, dear viewer, it's just a hypothetical. Now, before I get into the game itself, there's one more thing I want to mention. I'll just briefly go over this since it's not specific to Touhou 6, and there's a pretty easy fix for it. Old Touhou games have really bad input delay on newer machines. Thus, most people need to install a VSync patch in order to play the game without a massive disadvantage. I'll leave a link to the patch in the description, but most sources that you can download Touhou from have it pre-packaged with the game. I'm going to be reviewing this game from the perspective of someone who is using the VSync patch. Yes, I will get to the hitbox. Anyways, enough rambling, it's time to get playing. But what character to play as? Well, to tell you right off the bat, Reimu has a smaller hitbox than Marissa. She also has a homing shot type, which Marissa does not. And while Reimu may be slower than Marissa, that doesn't really matter that much in a game where you'll usually be making small precise movements to survive. So for beginners, I'd suggest playing as Reimu first, specifically Reimu A, since with her homing bullets you can focus on dodging instead of making sure you're actually doing damage to the boss. So you start the game on the difficulty, character, and shot type of your choice, and you're greeted by some introductory kick drums and the first ever file of fairies in the Windows series. The game mechanics are simple. You use the arrow keys to move, Z to shoot, X to bomb, and Shift to enter focus mode, which both slows down your character, allowing for more precise movements, and concentrates your shots on one area. You have a limited pool of lives and bombs. You can replenish bombs by collecting bomb drops, and you can replenish lives both by collecting life drops and reaching certain score thresholds. The score thresholds for earning a life in EoSD are as follows: 10 million, 20 million, 40 million, and 60 million. I know that sounds like a lot of points, but for Touhou it's really not that much, and you'll usually end up reaching all 4 thresholds in a playthrough, unless you lose all your lives early. Besides being the first ever stage in the Windows series, there's not that much to say about the first stage. The music is funny and Rumia is cute. She's also her own stage's mid-boss, a mid-boss being a slightly easier and shorter boss that appears in the middle of a stage. Bet you would have never guessed that one on your own. This usually wouldn't be that notable, but in this specific instance it is. Not only is Rumia the first ever boss in the Windows series, but the first ever mid-boss as well. The greedy bitch always hogging the spotlight? Well, not really, because she almost never appears after a stage in EoSD, only making a few appearances in some of the spin-off games. Despite this, Rumia is probably the most popular side character in the entire series. Not the best one though. There's one notable thing to say about the banter between Rumia and the protagonists, and that is the fact that Reimu tells Rumia that it's okay if she has humans for dinner. Keep in mind that Reimu's job is to protect humans and exterminate yokai. You might be wondering why Rumia is T-posing. It's because she thinks it looks like Jesus Christ on the cross. We're already getting into the psychedelic religious shit, aren't we, Zune? The accident was 2050 years ago, Rumia. You have to let go. Now, Rumia is a yokai of darkness, and you might think that fighting a yokai of darkness is a bit badass for a first stage. In Touhou, badass first stages are a given, so you should probably get used to it. And don't worry, even though you're fighting someone who can harness the power of darkness and T-pose eternally without her arms getting tired, you be the judge of which is more impressive. This fight is pretty easy. The only spell card that could really give you any trouble is your last one, because it's a bit disorienting, but I'm sure it would be way easier if you could see your hitbox. Oh yeah. I suppose it's finally time to talk about that before we get any deeper into the game. There's another outdated relic from the PC98 era present in EoSD that I've been neglecting to share with you up until now. I know you were having a fun, carefree time watching up until now, you rambunctious little person, but I'm afraid that all has to come crashing down now. Just like the PC98 games that preceded it, EoSD does not show you your hitbox when you enter focus mode. In fact, the first 3 Touhou games didn't even have focus mode. But that's besides the point. The point being that EoSD becomes a much harder game than it actually is because of the lack of this almost essential quality of life feature. Well, it's not really essential. I've played the game just fine without it, but it does make the game a lot harder to learn and adjust to when you have to memorize where your hitbox is, on top of the much more complicated things that you have to memorize in a bullet hell game. Of course, if you don't want to bother with that, there is a patch that you can download that lets you see your hitbox when you enter focus mode. I personally don't use it because I played EoSD to the point where I've already memorized where the hitbox is, but it's not like it's cheating if you use it. There are Touhou games that are much harder to beat that have this feature. I'm looking directly at you. In fact, every Touhou shmup after EoSD lets you see your hitbox when you enter focus mode. A good choice on Zune's part. For a game genre that's so focused on quick, precise movements, it feels natural that you should be able to see where your hitbox is. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Zune is babying us with all of these silly quality of life features that make the game more fun to play. And we should be playing Touhou like real men, with blood, sweat, and tears. No, I actually think I prefer to see my hitbox. EoSD's second stage is set in the Misty Lake, as either Reimu or Marissa make their way to the mansion on the edge of the lake. Again, even though this is the second stage in the Windows series, it isn't sounding all too impressive anymore. The point is there's not much to say about this stage. It's pretty easy barring the initial bullet spam, and the music sounds very wintry, if you know what I mean. I'm not good at describing why I like music, but it sounds wintry. It sounds like a Mario winter level. The mid-boss, Dayose, is a joke. She's also a fairy, so that's probably why she's such a pushover. The boss herself, however, is not someone to be taken lightly. They're actually the most powerful character in the series. I know, it's kinda crazy that the most powerful character is only on the second stage. But I'm telling you, Zuna's just quirky like that, dude. He's bussing for real. As you have probably guessed, or you probably already know, the second stage boss is Cerno. And yes, I know that it's pronounced Chirono and not Cerno, I know, but look, I can look at this and call it Touhou instead of Touhou, but looking at this and saying Chirono instead of Cerno with an American accent, it's not going to happen. Chirono, more like Chiruno, thank you. I'll pronounce it the way I like. Cerno has a couple of RNG based attacks, but it's nothing you can't handle with a bit of practice. Some people have trouble with her first pattern on higher difficulties, me, but you can pretty much avoid it by swinging side to side. Her attacks are ice themed because she's an ice fairy. I know, it's kind of revolutionary. Zuna is truly a master of symbolism. Cerno's theme, tomboyish girl in love, or lovable tomboyish girl, depending on who translated it for some reason, is one of my less favorite Touhou character themes actually, but apparently other people like it, so it's become one of the most popular Touhou songs ever, with remixes like Cerno's Perfect Math Class, which is actually pretty good and catchy, shooting Cerno's popularity up to become one of the most well-known and recognizable characters from the series. More money for the bootleggers, I guess. Not that they're not doing God's work. Cerno even gets her own spin-off game later, and it's actually really fun. Not to mention the fact that Cerno's idiocity and her belief that she's the strongest fairy ever, she's not, makes her a very endearing little fairy, in the sense that other people feel so bad for her that they egg her on and pretend that she's the strongest character. She also freezes frogs to amuse herself, killing 1 out of every 3 as I helplessly shatter to pieces. Please, stop letting her live this lie. She'll never change for the better if you keep encouraging her behavior. After you beat Cerno to an icy pulp, you move on to stage 3, which is the sky. This is the first stage that requires a fair bit of grazing to survive. These dagger bullets that can box you in on higher difficulties can be pretty mean if you're not prepared for them. Similarly to Rumia in stage 1, Hong Mei Ling is both the regular boss and the mid-boss of this stage. Now I know you might be wondering, well, so far I fought a yokai of darkness and an ice fairy, so surely Mei Ling is some kind of powerful sorceress, right? Well, her official title is Chinese Girl. That's like if a guy who made YouTube videos reviewing Touhou games was called like the Gensokyo Reviewer or something. So fucking unoriginal, dude. But really, Mei Ling is more than just a Chinese girl, depending on who you ask. She's really the skate guard. She's really the gate guard of the Scarlet Devil Mansion and also a martial arts genius, which is, admittedly, that's pretty Chinese, but you get the point. Mei Ling first tries to apprehend the protagonist outside of the Scarlet Devil Mansion, but fails and falls back into formation, a formation which is only comprised of her. She tells Reimu that shrine maidens are the kind of human that it's okay to eat, and she also insults Marissa's education, which is, it's not wrong, per se. Oh, and by the way, while I do like the banter between the characters in EoSD, I'm not going to put all of it into the video for the simple reason that it would make the video way too long. And I have to set that rule now before I get to games that have tons and tons and tons of dialogue, like Imperishable Night. I mean, I could probably make a whole video just based on Imperishable Night's dialogue, but I'm not gonna. Anyways, Mei Ling's fighting style, if you will, is all about making pretty colorful patterns until you piss her off and then she vomits identical bullets in your general direction. You can figure out her patterns easily enough, but that doesn't change the fact that her second spell card simply exists, a purely RNG attack, which you'll probably be cheesing with bombs for a while until you get better at raw dodging. Her second non-spell is pretty tough too, since you have Mei Ling randomly spitting bullets at you at the same time as some fairies shoot lines of daggers at you. You'll want to take Mei Ling out as quickly as possible on this one. Not on a date, she's a fictional character, get your mind out of the gutter. But you do not want to be stuck dodging this one for too long. Her last spell card also gets a fucking hard honorable mention, but in my opinion it's easier to dodge these shards than these circular bullets, probably because the latter are smaller. Overall, Mei Ling is tough for a stage 3 boss. She's not the hardest out there, but she's up there. Pretty impressive just for some random Chinese girl if you ask me. And for an indie project made in 2002, I must say that some of Mei Ling's attack look very pretty. This is when you start to see some of Zun's artistic talents really shine early on. Both of Mei Ling's themes are certified Zhongguo classics, and they fit her character because she's Chinese, though her stage theme is surprisingly more popular than her boss theme. For example, Mei Ling's theme in Hiso Tensoku is Chinese tea instead of Shanghai Alice of Meiji 17, which is a shame because Shanghai Alice of Meiji 17 is one of my favorite boss themes in the franchise. But I'm not a developer, I'm just a guy who makes Touhou videos. So really, what do I know? Now, Mei Ling already gets a hard time in canon because of her unfortunate nickname, but her fanon isn't any better. In fact, it's probably worse. You see, from an unknown source, Mei Ling seems to have gotten the reputation of being a lazy gate guard who sucks at her job because she sleeps all day. This is not really the case, because if it were the case, she probably would have been fired and or killed by her evil vampire overlord by now. Villains kill their incompetent underlings all the time, you know, like Dark Invader from Star Trek. Yeah, that guy. Remember him? Now, Mei Ling does sleep on the job, but she can still somehow wake herself up whenever she's needed, which is considerably more impressive than being awake and alert all the time. You beta bitches have to drink coffee and monsters in order to stay awake and do work, while the Sigma female Mei Ling simply conserves her energy and just lets her own body wake her up and whenever she needs to do something. How's that for a gag character, fanon writers? Okay, it's time for me to stop praising Mei Ling. She's a known CCP shill. She won't shut up about China's supremacy in Touhou Hiso. Give me a moment to pronounce this, please. She won't shut up about China's supremacy in Touhou Hiso Tensoku, and she also wears a modified Red Guard uniform, and we all know how that little tidbit of history turned out, so keep your easily manipulated children away from this woman. Of course, an aggressively Chinese girl protecting a Western mansion is a bit strange, but Zun? Well, I don't need to go over how quirky he is again, do I? After your chosen heroine After your chosen heroine defeats the gate guard Mei Ling, you move on to the Scarlet Devil mansion, more specifically the Magic Library. Now, this is probably one of my favorite stages in all of Touhou. It has a kick-ass theme, the bullet patterns are very diverse and unique, though of course, the visuals are a bit bland here compared to Mei Ling's Rainbow Fever. Patchouli is here too, the Touhou character most known for being my channel's mascot. This stage is just all around a joy to play every time, except for this part it can go to hell! The mid-boss of this stage is one of Touhou's biggest mysteries. We know her name is Kwakuma, but literally nothing else about her. People like to peg her as Patchouli's library assistant, like in the fan-made anime Memories of Phantasm, and for some reason, Memories of Phantasm makes Kwakuma absolutely obsessed with Patchouli, which, well, she's my channel mascot, so back off. She's also in Lost Word. I've never played Lost Word, I just know she's in it. Of course, the big boss of the Magic Library is none other than Patchouli Knowledge, and I just want to drill in the fact into your brain that, yes, her last name is literally Knowledge. Like, Zun could not have picked a less direct name, unless he chose something like Patchouli Magic Librarian. And while we're on the topic of Patchouli's name, patchouli is the name of a herb used in perfume, incense, tea, and the Stinkor action figure in the Masters of the Universe toy line. Whoever put that into the wiki page for Patchouli, I salute you for doing God's work. The dialogue between Marissa and Patchouli before the boss fight actually reveals the first hint of Marissa's debilitating kleptomania. Marissa suggests she might borrow some books from the library for an undefined period of time. This suggestion summons Patchouli, who stops standing still on my YouTube thumbnails in order to apprehend the intruder. Though I don't know why she cares about Marissa stealing her books so much. Have you seen how huge this magic library is? And Patchouli can supposedly create books out of thin air, like how to passively kill the black thing in front of you. Meaning Marissa, but I'm sure that certain members of the Republican Party can also get some use out of this magical book. Patchouli also pulls how to remove unnecessary portions of food out of thin air after the fairy strains exchange of, "I have enough, of plenty of things, then I'll dig in. I'm really delicious." This is why I pay more attention to Marissa's dialogue than anyone else's. It's usually more interesting. It's known, canonically, that Patchouli is a bit of an antisocial recluse, aka she pretty much has never left her library over the course of 100 years, but it makes sense that these two specifically wouldn't get along. While Marissa is a Western-style Eastern magician, Patchouli uses the 5 Chinese elements in her magic even though she lives in a Western-style mansion, making her an Eastern-style Western magician. But, you know, opposites do attract, and Marissa and Patchouli work together in one of the Subterranean Animism, the 11 Touhou games, scenarios. I really need to get better at making these scripts easier for me to read. Now, I know I already said that Patchouli's stage is one of my favorite stages in Touhou, but I have to be honest and say that her boss fight is also one of my favorite boss fights. It's quite easy for a stage 4 boss, but it's also one of the most unique fights that Touhou has to offer. You see, Patchouli is the first character to use different spell cards based on what character and shop type you're playing. A department store of techniques, according to Zune. Thanks, Zune. It's enough spell cards to make your mother cry. For you to stop playing the game with the little girls because you're stinking up the closet.
Just one more try, Mom!
Patchouli having this many spell cards does actually make sense though. She's the most powerful magician in Ginsokyou, sacrificing her physical health in the pursuit of magical knowledge. Again, it's literally her last name. You'd think that there would be magicians more powerful than one that's just a stage 4 boss, seeing that magic and spell cards are integral to the way of life of Ginsokyou's denizens, but there's actually only around 9 of them in the series. And yes, I know Byakuren is also a powerful magician, and Byakuren is a stage 6 boss, and also a fucking pain in the neck to deal with, but I'm actually willing to give Patchouli an advantage on her, on account of her debilitating asthma and anemia. When Patchouli is feeling better during the extra stage, she's more powerful than Byakuren could ever hope to be. After your chosen heroine defeats Patchouli, they move on deeper into the Scarlet Devil Mansion, onto Stage 5. Now, both Stage 5's regular theme and boss theme are pretty amazing, and here's why. Sakuya. If you know the context, that's probably all I need to tell you. Sakuya is a time-manipulating maid, I know. Zune's pulling out all the stops here. The head maid of the Scarlet Devil Mansion. During both her stage theme and her boss theme, the time signature, the number of beats per measure in a song, changes throughout the song, something that's very hard to pull off and will usually end up sounding like crap. But Zune is a musical genius, and he even has a special liquid that helps him be even more creative, so in this case it doesn't. Instead, it ends up really adding to the song. Zune has a knack for connecting his music to his characters in games. After all, he makes the music first. I mean, you've seen the pattern throughout this video already. Rumiet's playful theme, Cerno's icy textured theme, Mei Ling's Chinese theme, etc. Zune's games, as he said himself, are really just a medium for his music, and it really shows here. Anyways, enough gushing about the music. Just kidding. Have you played this part where the beat is timed to drop right after you finish Sakuya's absolutely unfair mid-boss spell card, and you get swarmed by enemies and bullets while the music just goes. It fucks. It just absolutely fucks, and you better believe that I'm gonna use it for this video's outro. The Maid in the Pocket Watch of Blood is my favorite Stage 5 theme in the entire series. The stage itself is fairly simple. There's fairy maids who shoot daggers at you. They're the easy part. The hard part are these fairy maids who shoot circle bullets at you super fast. If you haven't memorized the patterns they shoot them in, or if you're still uncomfortable with the hitboxes, you're gonna have a bad time. Especially at the very end of the stage, which I still just choose by bombing it when I'm playing on hard and lunatic. Sakuya's fight is a blast, and her theme is great, as I've already said. Her gimmick of being able to manipulate time translates well into gameplay. Sakuya can literally freeze the entire screen, making even the player unable to move, and then unfreeze it a second later where, to your chagrin, you find out that Because Sakuya can move the directions of her knives in a split second because of her powers, the knife that you just grazed is now pointing directly at you again. This gimmick, while it does work against you most of the time, can also lead to some very satisfying moments where you dodge both the knives coming at you and the ones that were previously no threat to you because they were off to the side, but Sakuya decided to move them into your general direction because she fucking hates you. It makes for a very unique and fun boss fight, not to mention that Sakuya's non-spells, where she doesn't use her powers, are still a blast. Instead of having to micro-dodge like you usually have to do in Touhou, Sakuya's non-spells have the player scrambling across the screen in order to dodge the walls of knives and rice coming at them. Last but not least, Sakuya is just a really cool name. It's like if Seamus had a direct Japanese translation. Once you're chosen heroine, I'm saying that too much. Once the protagonist of your choosing defeats Sakuya, you finally get to move on to the final stage, even deeper inside the Scarlet Devil Mansion. You could call it Stage 6. The music for the stage does really well at setting the mood for what's to come. It's triumphant, yet it has ominous undertones. Like with any of the other tracks in this game, it hits harder on lunatic mode. This one especially because you've already pretty much exhausted yourself getting to the final stage after days, weeks, maybe even months of practice, but you still have one final challenge ahead of you. 2 challenges actually. The stage 6 mid-boss is Sakuya again, and she has a spell card here that's literally just pure RNG. She doesn't even hide it. She says, "I have to at least make you waste a bomb before the mistress gets mad at me." Fuck you! She drops a bomb unless you time her out, so I guess it doesn't really matter whether you bomb or not. But an extra bomb would be nice. When you reach the end of this very short stage 6, the scenery changes. Before, you were looking at walls, but now you're beholding an ominous blood-red moon. And then she appears, the vampire lord herself, Remelia Scarlet. Obviously, being the final boss, she's the one behind all the red mist. She wants to go shroud the world in eternal shade, so she can go outside more. Yeah, it's pretty petty, but that's most Touhou's bosses, so. Despite her petty reasoning for being the bad guy or girl, the transition from walls to this scarlet red moon is really good at indicating that you're fighting the final enemy, even though she isn't the final enemy, but whatever. Remelia's fight overall is actually pretty easy if you know what you're doing. I see people struggle with it, but most of her patterns are deceptively simple. Remelia also showcases what is probably one of the easiest final spells out of the entire series. Seriously, some of her regular spell cards are harder than her final spell. I think that if Zune switched Scarlet Meister and Scarlet Genzokyo and all of their counterparts, it would make for a much harder fight and a more interesting climax. Yes, I'm evil, how could you tell? After you beat Romelia, you can get a total of 6 different endings, depending on what character you played as, what shot type you played with, and whether or not you 1cc'd the game. There's 1 bad ending and 2 good endings for each character. I originally wrote like 10 paragraphs talking about the endings, but why? It's just an extra 5 minutes of fluff on top of an already very long video. There's not much to talk about anyways. If you want to watch them, you can look them up. They're all on YouTube. All you really need to know is that if you get the bad ending, the Scarlet Mist stays, and if you get the good ending, all the characters are suddenly friends and having tea parties together, in typical Touhou fashion. Now here's a fun fact. Did you know that Romelia is called the Scarlet Devil because she's so sloppy when she sucks people's blood that she spills her victim's blood all over her dress, staining it scarlet? It's also the reason why she doesn't create any new vampires from her victims. According to Zune, she's a light eater. Now it's not like EoSD's endings are groundbreaking or anything. Witty endings have been a thing in the series since the first ever game, and actual dialogue since the second. But they are a very satisfying way to end off a run, getting to see your favorite characters banter with each other in a scene written by Zune himself. Unless your favorite characters include Rumia, Dayose, Cerno, Mei Ling, Kwakuma, Patchouli, or Flandre. But I'm not picky. I know I'd kill to get even a crumb of official slice of life content. What would you be willing to do? Now, even though I just went over the endings, we still have the extra stage to talk about. Hold on to your hats. This one's a doozy. EoSD's extra stage is, to put it bluntly, infamous. Many people, Touhou fans or otherwise, have downloaded EoSD just so they can play the extra stage. Of course, like all other extra stages, you need to 1cc the game at least once to unlock it. But some people just download copies of the game that have pre-modified data. Basically, they're downloading used files, meaning the extra stage is already unlocked for them. Or, more recently, with the discovery of the Unlock Everything codes for Touhou 6, 7, and 8, they'll just use that instead. I guess their rabid excitement to see Flandre has clouded their judgment, because I don't know how they'd expect to be able to reach Flandre herself without having some experience with the games. Extra stages are locked behind a 1cc for a reason, you know.
That reason being they're really fucking hard.
To those who are wondering why this is the case, the answer is simple. UN Owen was her. This song, and by extension Flandre herself, has become such a staple of internet culture that even though that culture is sort of dying out, UN Owen was her still remains associated more with the broad term meme songs than with Touhou itself. And some people, upon discovering the origins of this song, want to go check it out for themselves. It's become the most common ground zero for new Touhou fans. Despite not being the best Touhou song, at this point it's already cemented itself so deep into the collective internet conscience, partly due to memes like the Ronald McDonald x Touhou crossover, that it's almost impossible to talk about Touhou 6, or sometimes even Touhou itself, without explaining its significance, even though the song and the memes associated with it are like decades old. Really, the fact that this song has remained relevant after 20 years, especially because of the fact that those 20 years have been the 21st century, UN Owen was her can provide a lot of insight into how the Touhou franchise has managed to remain relevant in internet culture for so long, despite pretty much being a one-man show. But for now, let's stick to the extra stage itself. Overshadowed by UN Owen, the extra stage's theme is the Centennial Festival for Magical Girls. Well, why wasn't I invited? It's a shame that this song didn't share its boss fight counterpart's fame, because it's honestly a beautiful track. It's the upbeat, carefree calm before the ear-splitting storm that is UN Owen. Don't think for a second that this extra stage is upbeat or carefree though, because it's a goddamn nightmare. It's certainly not the hardest extra stage, but it's definitely up there. Get ready to dodge a veritable swarm of bullets because this stage does not pull its punches. Patchouli makes her appearance as the mid-boss, and goddamn is there a big difference between the relatively easy Stage 4 boss Patchouli and mid-boss Patchouli. Her first 2 spell cards require both motor skills and divine memorization, and then she hits you with the last spell card, which is literally just 5 different patterns being spammed at you at once. It's very hard to clear consistently, At least I still can't, and most EoSD players I've seen can't either. The silver lining is when, or rather if, you beat Patchouli, you're pretty much done with the hard part of the stage. These huge blocks of bullets just need to be streamed, and these randomly shot bullets are relatively slow, making them easier to dodge. But it's finally time for the moment you've all been waiting for.
Number 5. Flandre Scarlet.
Once you reach Flandre, she starts talking about how she's been kept locked up in the basement of the Scarlet Devil mansion for almost 500 years. Romelia keeps her under lock and key because Flandre doesn't know how to control her destructive powers, and trust me, they're pretty damn destructive. Now, Flandre gets a bad rap in fanon mostly because people associate being locked up for 500 years and not being able to control your own powers with insanity. I can't really blame them, even though that's not really the case. Flandre actually stays in the basement of her own will. The only time she's really tried to break out of her basement is after the events of EoSD, aka during the extra stage, because after Reimu beat the shit out of Romelia and the rest of the Scarlet Devil mansion, she didn't have anything to eat, so she went out to find things to eat. Sounds pretty harmless, you might say, until you realize that her diet consists mainly of humans. So, the reason you're fighting Flandre is because you want her to go back inside her basement and not kill humans on a mass scale, Holocaust style. Flandre's boss fight definitely deserves its reputation, and even though the lack of quality of life features may exaggerate this boss fight's difficulty, it is still very difficult, no matter how you slice it. That isn't a bad thing though, in fact, it's one of the most fun extra stages in my opinion. It's definitely exhilarating, being down to your last life and last few bombs on Flandre's final spell, which is very difficult, but still managing to eke out a victory at the very last second. Clutch style. Now, I'm not going to go over all of Flandre's spell cards, because it would take like 10 minutes, and chances are you probably already know how the fight goes anyways, but if you don't, go see for yourself. If this video hasn't convinced you to at least try Touhou 6, let me do it here.
Please play Touhou 6. Please, please, please. It's such a fun game. Come on, you have to play it.
Anyways, once you beat Flandre, it can be assumed that she fucks off back to her basement. Now, it's finally time for me to talk about the music. It took me long enough, seeing as it's literally the most recognizable aspect of the game. So recognizable, in fact, that most people who listen to it don't even know that Touhou 6 is a game. Remember when I said I didn't want this video to turn into a feature-length film starring Jared Leto? Well, this video was officially long enough to classify as a feature-length film. Still doesn't have Jared Leto in it though. Here's Jared Leto. Anyways, my point is, for the sake of brevity, I'm only gonna be going over the most standout tracks from EoSD. Those standout tracks being Septet for a Dead Princess and You and No One Was Her, because they're literally the top 2 Touhou songs in the popularity poll every single year. I think it's safe to assume that they are pretty standout. We'll start with Septet for a Dead Princess. What does Zune have to say about this iconic Touhou track? Romelia Scarlet's theme. Go on. With this, I tried for a "this is the end" feeling. Well, I'd say he nailed that, especially with the whole Blood Moon setup before the boss fight. It makes it feel, dare I say, pretty epic. I didn't want it to be regal or ominous, which is normal for a final stage, so I made it jazz fusion based with a hint of lolly. Wait, that's not any different from normal. Well, I say you absolutely failed at making it not sound regal or ominous. Like really, you're trying to make a non-regal theme and then you literally use the most regal sounding piano ever? Not to mention that trumpets, which Zune is famous for using in his songs, are the most regal instruments you could possibly use. I mean, they're the things that go whenever a king or something shows up in a movie. Not that that's bad or anything. Regal sounding fits Romelia perfectly, seeing as how, well, regal she is, when she's not literally crying because things aren't going her way at least. The melody is easy even for me to get, so I like this song. Well I actually think that it's this fact, that the melody for Septet for a Dead Princess is so simple, is what makes this song so popular in the first place. I mean, why do you think pop music is so popular? Because it's catchy.
And because most pop artists have $1 million advertising budgets.
You can't deny that most of the most popular Touhou songs are popular because they're just earworms, infecting the listener's brain so much that they just have to go sharing it with the internet so it stops tormenting them and stealing their lunch money. You and Owen Was Her, which is the Touhou song, at least in terms of popularity, also follows this rule. It's unapologetically catchy. How can a song be unapologetic, you ask? Well, because it pierces your ears with the same melody over and over again, eventually driving you insane enough to make you quit to be a Touhou fan. What does Zune have to say about this one? Flandre Scarlet's theme. Go figure. I like this one the best out of the whole game. Go figure. It depicts a devilish girl in an oriental and mysterious way. Go figure. Lolly-tastic melodies like this are what I'm best at, so I had a lot of fun composing this. There's not much else to say about You and Owen Was Her, because I know for a fact that you have already heard it before. It's the most popular Touhou song ever. But here's an interesting fact you may not know. Did you know that it only took Zune a few hours to compose You and Owen Was Her, and he did it in only one sitting? You may not know it because I actually don't know if it's true or not. I just saw someone say that once and went, yeah, that sounds about right. If you can confirm or deny this fun fact, please do so. God, I love spreading misinformation on the internet. Besides these two iconic pieces of both music and internet history, the rest of EoSD's soundtrack is honestly really fucking good. I wish I had time to talk about them. A lot of the songs get overshadowed by the big five, like the extra stage theme and the stage 6 theme and the stage 5 theme and the stage 4 theme, and, well, really every single stage's theme besides stage 3, which is in the aforementioned big five. And you can shoot me in the head and bury me 6 feet under for saying this, but there are Touhou games with better soundtracks. One in particular comes to mind. God, I love being completely unbiased and objective. And I know I already called EoSD's soundtrack really fucking good, but come on, really fucking good? It's just an average Wednesday for Zune, really. Now, I can't, in good faith, make an in-depth retrospective of Touhou 6 without talking about Sarai. Sarai is a manga that Zune was heavily inspired by. So inspired, in fact, that he took character designs and names straight from the manga. Some say this is plagiarism. I say, not really. It's more like just a reference to this manga more than anything. I mean, it's not like he literally ripped the characters straight out of the manga and put them in his game. For example, Zune's Patchouli is an anemic magic librarian. Sarai's Patchouli, on the other hand, is a battle maid who got gang raped at age 11 and went on to kill the people who raped her. So yeah, I think it's safe to say that this is less plagiarism and more a reference to a manga that Zune likes. It's like how after you become a Touhou fan, you can't help but notice all the references to Touhou that people put everywhere, because it seems like half the Earth's population are secretly Touhou fans. Anyways, back on script. Here's the part where I summarize my thoughts about the game. This video still isn't over yet, but I wanted to give a quick conclusion before we get into the more meta stuff like the public reception of EoSD. Overall, EoSD is an addictingly fun and stunningly brilliant game, at least by early 2000s indie game standards. God, I sound like a fucking game journalist. It has, obviously, an amazing soundtrack, interesting and well-designed characters, and it features Touhou's satisfying gameplay loop of improving your high score or grinding out the next 1cc. Despite this, it's brought down by its very noticeable flaws, chief among them being the lack of quality of life features and the lack of unique and interesting gimmicks, though that one in particular is more a matter of opinion. At least EoSD doesn't have arbitrary or game-breaking gimmicks like some bullet hells. You take what you can get. Honestly, most of EoSD's noticeable flaws are really non-issues unless you're really a stickler for more fluid movement and shiny danmaku. Though the lack of a visible hitbox is a real detractor here, and while this is also made a non-issue by simply patching the game, some people just don't want to do that or want to play the game as it was made. Other helpful quality of life features missing from EoSD include the glowing enemy sign at the bottom of the screen so you don't have to dart your eyes around like you're on crack in order to see where the enemy is while dodging bullets, and any sort of indication on the boss's health bar for when they're going to start a new attack or die. Again, you'll probably memorize these things as you get more experienced with the game, but isn't it much more intuitive and player-friendly to just show these things to the player instead of making them memorize every little detail? UI design is much more important than most people think. If you've ever played a game with a really shitty and confusing UI, you'll probably know what I'm talking about. And it's not like the lack of quality of life features is the only thing making EoSD non-beginner friendly. The amount of attacks that use RNG as a crutch for their difficulty leads to a lot of moments where you die because the already disorienting swarm of bullets didn't go where you thought they were gonna go, which can be really frustrating at times. But despite all of this, I can't really criticize Zune directly. Although he did have some prior game development knowledge with the PC-98 system, EoSD was the first ever game he developed for Windows. This resulted in Zune spending a lot more time on the technical aspects of the game rather than the artistic ones. You can really tell sometimes. But, if anything, it's genuinely impressive that Zune managed to make a game this fun to play, even with his limited experience and gameplay restraints due to technical limitations, though it's not like he's a stranger to that. And even though I've basically criticized almost everything about this game at this point, there are some aspects that I think EoSD does better than most, if not all, of the other Touhou titles. For instance, the way you get lives differs throughout the series. Sometimes it's simple, sometimes it's really convoluted and annoying. In EoSD, it's simple, and I've already went over it. If you reach certain point thresholds, you get a life. It's a really simple system that works. And not only does it let you focus on the fun part of a bullet hell game, i.e. dodging bullets, it also encourages player to adopt a more aggressive and risky playstyle to maximize their points. Though that is optional because again, the point thresholds are very forgiving and you will usually get all the points you need for lives in a playthrough. Whether you think this is a good thing or not is completely up to you. I know some people hate this system, but I really prefer it, and well, guess who's running the YouTube channel? Really, anyone can criticize Touhou 6 all you, or they want. It won't change the fact that Touhou 6 is both an absolutely iconic video game and extremely important to the rest of the games, really, the most important of the bunch. It laid the foundations for what a good Touhou game should be. A relatively lighthearted romp through Gensokyo with dazzling visuals, catchy music, and ball-busting difficulty that makes you want to kill yourself. Every game after EoSD is just really building on the foundation that EoSD laid, making it bigger and usually better, but never straying away from the core formula that makes Touhou games so addicting. And if the core formula wasn't addicting, we probably wouldn't be on the 18th Touhou game right now, in addition to 12 official spin-off games with the 13th coming in just 3 days. And ultimately, if EoSD wasn't such a great launching point for the series, its 20th anniversary probably wouldn't be such an important event for so many people around the world. Put that one in your pipe and smoke it. If EoSD was a bad game, if the music was ear-grating and the characters were boring, and Zune was a plagiarizing hack, what would become of the international community that Zune has fostered and supported over the years? It probably wouldn't exist. I think I've gone over all that really needs to be said. Again, EoSD is definitely one of the most flawed games in the Windows series, but it's also one of the most naturally fun ones, and I think in this case the fun and importance of the game outweighs the flaws. Though, with everything being said, I still don't think EoSD is a good Touhou for beginners, no matter how badly you want to play the quintessential Touhou game, unless you're prepared for a frustrating newcomer experience. I still recommend you play it though, no matter what. Now, you might be wondering, okay, so you've told us your opinion about the game, but what about everybody else's opinion? Well, if you really insist that I'm not actually the Touhou Messiah, and that maybe my experience is subjective or something, which is absolutely preposterous, I tell you, then I'll do some research on Google for you. Oh, what did I find out? Well, people generally seem to agree with me, on most things at least. Overwhelmingly, EoSD is liked by the Touhou community, but many also recognize its flaws, with some encouraging newcomers to steer clear of it until they have some experience with the more user-friendly titles, like Perfect Cherry Blossom. But honestly, it seems like even the people who suck at this game seem to really enjoy it, even the ones who don't know VPatch exists. Of course, EoSD does have its detractors, as with everything. They recognize EoSD as an okay game, but don't understand why it's lauded by the community as one of the best entries of the Touhou series. This perspective makes sense when you look at the game from a purely gameplay-centric standpoint. Yes, Touhou 6 is one of the worst games in the series, but for the Touhou community, it's really about the game itself. Touhou 6 is revered by the fanbase because Touhou 6 is a goddamn cultural icon. Yeah, I'm gonna continue my rant from 6 paragraphs ago, and that's gonna be the conclusion to this video. I already went over this in the beginning of the video, but now that we have even more context, let's take a deeper look. When you think of Touhou characters, who are the first few that come to mind? It's most likely not the unconnected Marketeers crew, is it? You probably thought of series icons like Sakuya, Patchouli, Flandre, Cerno, Ramilia, not to mention Reimu and Marissa themselves. When you think of Touhou music, what do you think of? This is a more mixed bag, but you probably think of Yu and Owen, Knight of Knights, lovable tomboyish girl, septet for a dead princess. When you think of Touhou fan content, what do you think of? Probably Bad Apple first, but there's also so much fan content that revolves around EoSD, a whole entire fan-made anime for one. I probably couldn't even count them all on the fingers of the victims that I have slain over the years. Tax collectors beware. Now, you can be pretentious and say, I actually didn't think of any of those things. There are much better Touhou characters and music and fan work than those. EoSD is so overrated. And you might as well be right. And you know what? I absolutely fucking agree with you. There are much better Touhou characters and music and fan works, but that doesn't change what I'm getting at here. What I'm getting at is the 300,000 Mariah Shrine downloads. Sure, a lot of them are probably people who tried Touhou 6 as their first Touhou game, decided it wasn't for them, and didn't pick up any of the other games, but that's still almost 2 times as many downloads as Perfect Cherry Blossom, which is the second most downloaded Touhou game on the site. Not to mention that EoSD ekes out the #1 spot on popularity polls time and time again. Whether you like it or not, whether you think I'm completely jumping the gun here and going batshit insane after writing a 12,000 word essay on a bullet hell game and having to edit an hour of my own voice, Touhou 6 made Touhou. It molded the entirety of the franchise going forward. Zune wanted EoSD to be a reboot for the series, and he absolutely smashed that goal. Touhou Dojin circles at Comiket went from 1 booth in Comiket 63 to 2,372 booths in Comiket 77, breaking the convention's record for sheer number of booths dedicated to one franchise, previously held by some tennis manga. Zune didn't just reboot the series with this little Dojin game, he exploded its popularity, and that's still being felt to this day, because at the end of the day, EoSD's music will always be the most popular in mainstream Touhou music. Patchouli will always be the funny lol Touhou fan moment, Sakuya will always be the funny knife maid, Ramilia will always be the funny hey Mr. Jailbait vampire, Cerno will always be associated with the number 9, which by the way is not from this game, but you get the point. Love them or hate them, EoSD's characters and music have cemented their legacy in internet culture as the quintessential Touhou experience. Maybe you really like Perfect Cherry Blossom and want those characters and tracks to be the most popular. You want Letty Whiterock to replace Rumi in the fanbase's eyes. It doesn't matter, because EoSD will never go away. Its popularity may fade, but it will never go away. And while it might get overshadowed by the sheer amount of Touhou characters and music that has been released since, EoSD will always be the foundation for not just the games, but for the entire franchise's popularity. Love them or hate them, these weirdos are the founding fathers of Touhou, and the reason that you and I have an outlet to enjoy this quote-unquote moe stuff. Unless you're not a fully fledged Touhou fan yet, in which case I highly recommend that you get more into the series, play the games, read the manga, listen to the music while you go about your daily business. Once you get past the anime style, if that's the sort of thing that bothers you, I know it bothered me at first, and the bad apples in the community, which also bother me, I know that you will come to love Touhou, whether you're a transgender Twitter artist, or an unironic Nazbol, or anything in between. I know that you will come to love Touhou eventually, because there's such a huge, diverse amount of Touhou content out there that there's something for everybody to enjoy, and EoSD is the root of it all. Even though you may have decision paralysis at first when trying to get into Touhou, you will be able to find something that you're interested in eventually. For me, it's the amazing and addicting games. For you, it could be the porn.